Welcome to Exception Handlers, the podcast where CTOs debug the challenges that keep us up at night. I'm Alex.
And I'm Bill, and we're here to deep dive into the runtime errors facing technology leaders today. Those real-world problems that only surface when our systems meet the complexity of actual operations.
This podcast is brought to you by the LA CTO Forum, a professional organization of technology executives in Southern California and beyond. The forum recently surveyed its members on various topics related to AI, and in this episode, we'll be doing a deep dive on the results. Before I begin, I should mention that along with this podcast, we will be publishing companion infographics, which will be available in your neighborhood LinkedIns everywhere. And with that, let's begin. So the survey was organized into kind of two big sections. One was AI and its impact on software development, and the other was the impact of AI on the enterprise. And so we're going to take these in chunks. We'll start with the AI on software development. And the very first topic there is, are people actually using AI for software development? Which is a fair question. And it seems like people are. The majority of the organizations we surveyed, 57%, use AI for the majority of their development, which is 16% or more. And a significant percentage of those, 40%, use it almost all the time, so over 80%. And it's interesting also, meanwhile, while this is happening, AI is not actually required for most organizations. 62% are optional, the rest are mandated. So what do you think about that, Bill?
Well, I think it's curious on one hand that the majority of development is 61%, but it being required is only about 38%. So there's a lot of voluntary participation for the majority of development there, which tells you that fundamentally, at least at the very high level, there seems to be some successes.
Yeah, and it's one of those where maybe unlike some of the past tooling and options available to developers where you kind of had to prod and plead, you can name any number of them. AI seems to be, once you try it, especially if you're using a good tool, and we'll get to that in a minute, you're like, yeah, I could see how this could be helpful. And people just start embracing it.
Well, and talk about something that has a million different ways it can be implemented.
And a million ways it can actually help you, whether it's writing code, tests, reading documentation on your behalf, preparing PRs, and on and on and on. Like all the ways it can actually improve your life as a developer. And I think that plays a role as well.
Absolutely.
And I think that leads us to the fact that, for the most part, AI tooling is either meeting or exceeding expectations. The large majority report, 74% report that they are at least satisfied, if not it exceeds expectations. Although I will say there's a small but vocal minority who really are finding AI tools lacking. They are falling significantly below expectations. We're talking about 5% of the users here, but nonetheless, not everybody is in love with AI.
Yeah, and I have to wonder, what's underneath that feeling? Because as we just said, with AI, there's so many different ways you can apply it. There's so many different things you can do. Whether or not it's the fundamental basis for your development, it is very handy for even the simplest of tasks.
Yeah, well, we actually took a closer look as to what differentiates those who, let's call them highly satisfied versus the highly unsatisfied. And I think you can summarize the differences between those groups in kind of 4 areas: tool diversity, intensity of adoption, technical sophistication, and then maturity of governance. And really what that means is the highly unsatisfied, if you look at what they're actually doing, have only tried maybe a Copilot or a Cursor, or typically nothing at all, and barely use it, so 0 to 20%. They don't really use any advanced techniques, which we'll get to a little bit later. And generally speaking, they tend to not have any AI strategy or like security policies around use of AI or any other kind of governance. So there is a very clear, not only difference in like attitude towards AI, but even all the stuff surrounding it, like governance.
Well, and I think governance is the key word there. That to me, that kind of feels like you're going to use this tool because we're supposed to, and there's not really this, I'm going to say, user-driven or developer-driven desire. It's more top-down as opposed to bottom-up, would be my guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's very possible. Yeah, and one question I had kind of about this whole thing is, I was thinking, is this kind of driven mainly by skepticism? So in other words, I don't think AI will work, and therefore I'm not even going to bother with it. Or is it more disappointment? I tried AI, it sucked, and now I don't want to use it. And if you look at the data, it does seem like the users who complain about AI falling well below expectations have actually used it to some degree, but they have not kind of broken through to the other side. So like they've used it enough to hit the pain points, code quality, context limits, hallucinations, but not enough to kind of get past them and maybe overcome them, which to some degree is where the hope perhaps lies for these people. Like if you think it sucks today, maybe give it a little bit more of a shot to see if you can get there. But yeah.
I mean, absolutely, that's a possibility. One of the other things that I think, again, from the top down perspective, you get the feeling through some of the quotes, for instance, things like it can sometimes create more work and also require reviewing the code it produces. Or I have not seen any productivity gains, which to me is like, you made me use it and I'm not doing better. Will you stop making me use it?
Yeah.
But the other side too, and I think we've all seen this to a certain extent, buggy code generation, inaccurate information. I mean, everybody knows that there are some hallucinations going on there. And then finally, the last one was developers have to learn a new skill. They are not instantly boosted. And that to me just screams, thou shalt use.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this is kind of really an interesting way to think about this, right? So yes, if you used AI for any sort of duration for development, you will inevitably see the problems. And those problems are well known, well discussed, whether it's bugs, hallucinations, just completely out of left field solutions, or runaway refactorings that end up generating inconceivable lines of code that you have to go deal with.
I mean, we all have the burn marks somewhere.
Yeah, all that sucks. There's no question about this. And then like at the end of the day, it is a new skill, and that's a really important point. Like you're not going to just magically get great at using it and get maximum productivity. It takes time. It takes, in my personal experience, it really takes like an organizational sustained effort to try it, knowledge share about how to use it well, tips and tricks, you name it. And then eventually start seeing like meaningful change in
100%. I mean, there has to be team-wide commitment to this, because to your point, there's a lot of stuff that's going to go wrong. And if that is amplified in any way, it's going to make this unusable.
Yeah, it's easy to kind of nope out of it the second you see something go wrong. It takes a commitment to be like, no, there's a there. I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I got to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the overall sort of takeaway here is it seems like most developers are finding value, true value in the tooling, and also, I would say, aren't forced to do it. To the degree it's not mandated, but it's not perfect. And that imperfection definitely is turning some off.
Agreed.
And so moving on, the next thing is you want to talk about the tooling that is used. And I would say this is really a 3-horse race between Claude, that is leading the pack at 66%, followed by Copilot at 60%, and then Cursor at 56%. Notably, majority of the people surveyed, 83%, are using multiple tools. And what's interesting is that it's inevitably some combination of the three I just mentioned. So either it's Claude plus Cursor, Claude plus Copilot, Copilot plus Cursor, and so on and so forth. And so that, I think, really paints a picture about just there's definitely a leading pack of very well-established and well-liked tools. Some of them early movers like Copilot, some of them maybe a little bit later to the scene and maybe haven't gotten the traction like OpenCodex, which is at about 18%, or Google CLI. But yeah, there is a dynamic emerging here for sure.
Yeah, and this is something that I would love for us to dive into in one of the CTO Forum meetings, just to find out what the basis is for a lot of these things. I mean, are these things just clearly the 3 best tools out there, period? Or is there some combination that they're finding that, it's bringing together a different utility value for each one?
Yeah, I mean, I also think, there's got to be, especially in larger organizations, how much friction exists in using each of these tools. So like, I will speak for myself, in an organization that has like a Microsoft agreement in place, you get Copilot just kind of part of the furniture, right? It's there and you can use it, and it's almost hard to avoid it. But it's a real effort to go get like Anthropic approved or Cursor approved, because there's all kinds of concerns about data security and compliance and all the governance we talked about earlier. So it's actually interesting to me to think of it from that perspective, because like if that's the case, like Copilot, you can understand why it's such a dominant position because it's in everything and it's hard to almost avoid it. The other ones, that's actually an effort, especially in larger organizations, to bring them in and use them.
Yeah, and I think just from personal experience, Claude Code was a brilliant foray into kind of the Swiss Army blade uh, tool, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there are so many places where you just drop in, fire that thing up, and start working. That I think it makes it compelling for a completely different reason than the other larger enterprise type software development environments.
Well, speaking of Claude, interesting side note here. I went and looked back at the highly unsatisfied responders, and literally none of them use Claude or have ever used Claude. Whereas the highly satisfied, the vast majority use Claude. And I'm not saying it's all Claude, but I am
Yeah, yeah.
saying tools matter.
Yeah, well, and again, it could simply be because they're using Claude for much smaller scopes, and so your risk of blowing things up are much lower.
Yeah, it could be. Definitely. I will also say, I don't know if you've had experience comparing Claude with other sort of command line agentic tools. I've tried Open Codex as well, and I'm actually struck by the difference in the interaction. So Claude, I feel like when you're working with it, you're just talking to it, and it's kind of gives you pauses, lets you intervene, lets you have a conversation, lets you guide it. Whereas Open Codex, you give it a thing, and then 10 days later, it comes back with 30,000 lines of code, and like, hopefully it didn't make a bad turn somewhere, because if it did, you need to now go and spelunk through a lot of stuff. So there's almost like a by design, Claude expects an interaction, like a
Yes.
constant conversation, whereas the other one is really like, I'm going to take your orders, I'm going to go do this thing over here, I'm going to come back sometime later, and then let's hope everything worked out.
I agree 100%. That piecemeal interaction, and it does give you the ability to let it take off larger chunks.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it'll do something and kind of say, how we doing, how we doing.
Yeah.
But I saw the same thing earlier on when I was using Klein.
Yeah.
It was great, but the Klein guys were adding a bunch of stuff that obfuscated what's going on behind the curtains a lot more. And so, to your point, yeah, you turn it on, and all of a sudden, it's like, oh boy, did I build a bunch of stuff, and now I need to go, rummage through it to see what exactly that was.
It actually, this brings me to what we've described there, where you just kind of, it goes off and does its thing. I mean, that's vibe coding, right? You don't really get
Yeah.
a chance to kind of intervene and see, because most of the time you don't even know what the tech stack is that it's building in, much less what particular choices it's making. And I was actually surprised by how often vibe coding tools came up in this, again, CTO survey. 10% of the people are using some flavor of Replit, Bolt, VO, or any one of or any other ones.
I have no basis for understanding that myself, because even with the smaller pieces, I find it every once in a while taking a little side exit and doing things that I find only later.
I wonder if that's less engineers and more like product managers using these vibe coding tools, but they're reporting
I'm
it
going
as
to
a
say
part
yes, probably.
Yeah, yeah.
And that makes sense.
And the other, just kind of to complete the thought on this whole thing, there's actually also a long chain of other tools that are available. So Junie, which is the JetBrains one, came up. Klein, you mentioned, Windsurf, Factory.ai. There was even one mentioned, I've never heard of this before, it's interesting, ECA with Emacs. Apparently there's a AI pair programming tool that plugs directly to Emacs.
My blood runs cold.
Yeah, like, I am not going to wade into the Emacs.
Use whatever you want. I'm just saying, I see Emacs and I shiver.
Yeah, yeah, not for me, but I can certainly understand other people and their desire to do it. But the kind of the bottom line takeaway for this whole thing is lots of tooling options available. Your mileage may vary. Some are quite popular, some are less so. But yeah, people are definitely aren't lacking for options in this area.
Which one last note on that? It's going to be interesting to see whether the options continue to expand or they start coalescing around things that people are finding work.
Given the hype cycle part of the curve we're in right now, I would say there's still enough investment going in that you're probably going to see more and more entrants here. But at some point, like with everything else, it's going to consolidate on a handful of choices. And I would be very hard pressed to imagine some of the more well-funded players here, like Anthropic, aren't going to ultimately be one of the few options people just kind of go to because it's the thing to do.
Yeah, that's my guess as well.
And so let's then move on to the kind of the last bit of this part of the survey, which is advanced techniques. And I would say, for the most part, people are using advanced techniques, and we'll talk about specifics in a minute here. And they're possibly useful, right? So if you look at what people are doing outside of just the normal sort of agentic AI, MCP is pretty big, and multi-agent development is pretty big. So the majority of the surveyed members report using both, or 55% of the time, either or MCP or some kind of a multi-agent thing, whether it's multiple agents collaborating on the same thing or sub agentic architectures. But people seem to be using those quite a bit. That said, a significant minority, 25%, aren't using anything as far as advanced techniques. They're just using, whatever sort of is out of the box available for just prompting and getting results back.
Yeah, and I have a feeling this probably correlates pretty well with those who are, in terms of using MCP or multi-agent, those who are using AI for the majority of their development.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And again, the 25%, it again correlates with those who are still a little tepid about the whole thing.
It's definitely a kind of a next level unlock of productivity thing. If you can figure out multi-agent stuff, especially, you can essentially then do multiple things at the same time, hopefully with some success, and that lets you be significantly more productive. So it's a real force multiplier. MCP may be a little less so, but in some contexts, it could be very useful. Okay. All right. Moving on. So the second half of the survey was around use of AI in the enterprise. And here, I want to start by looking at a question we asked, which is, how would organizations rate their AI strategy maturity? In terms of on a kind of a scale of 1 to 5. And the choices were: it's transformational, so AI is fundamentally changing the business model. It's strategic, AI is integrated into the business strategy. Tactical, so specific use cases are being pursued in production. Experimental, we're doing pilot projects and kind of in the learning phase, and then nothing yet. We haven't tried anything. And so what I was struck by is just how balanced the distribution is. So we're looking at 7% of the companies think they're transformational, 12% haven't started anything. And then it kind of almost evenly splits between the other three.
Yeah, and I would be interesting at some point to have conversations with those who are using it strategically and those experimentally to know what the nuanced difference is. Because in the startup world, I think you're doing both at the same time.
Well, this is one of the things. Size of the company very much impacts kind of how you answer this question. And if you're a large enterprise and you're saying it's transformational, that means a lot more than if you're like a startup of 2 and you're saying it's transformational. Surely,
absolutely, yeah.
Scope matters. So digging in more on differences between the two extremes, the transformational orgs and the non-adopters. So the transformational orgs are really all in. Daily use, 81 to 100% of the code being developed is using agentic development, mandated, enterprise-grade security typically for AI stuff, and then plenty of advanced kind of technique adoption. Whereas non-adopters barely use AI, if at all. They have no governance in place. And, their expectations are wildly divergent about AI and what they're expecting. The transformational organizations, they are the high satisfiers, very highly correlated. The non-adopters also highly correlate with the highly unsatisfied.
Yeah, and again, you have to wonder how they were introduced to it, what the expectations were for it, and when they did use it, how things went. It is not surprising, though, that the transformational orgs are going all in with things like MCP, et cetera, because if you're going to make this the basis of your world, you have to embrace things like MCP to be able to take advantage of it fully, and in terms of the day-to-day changes we're seeing in the technology itself.
And it's also I just want to make this point clear if it's not clear. This isn't the question of whether like AI is heavily used for product development. This is a question of whether AI is kind of embedded into the enterprise across all kinds of stuff, right? So to your point, if you're going to go all in on AI across the enterprise, whether it's impacting how you make products, how you sell, how you do all kinds of stuff, market, clearly your engineering has to lead the charge there, and clearly they have to be all in. So there's a very strong correlation there. The other thing that was really interesting is what these companies are concerned about. So we'll talk a little bit more about overall kind of concerns later, but if you look specifically at the transformational organizations and what they are concerned about when it comes to AI versus the non-adopters, the transformational organizations, their number one concern is getting a return on the ROI on their AI investment, whereas the non-adopters are primarily concerned about the business model that would come out of using AI. So if you kind of step back, those who are all in are really asking themselves the soul searching question of, did I make a mistake? Or is this really going to produce results? Those who haven't gone in at all are like, I don't even know where to begin here because I don't know what the business model would be if AI is now driving the bus. So I just thought it was kind of a interesting note.
Well, the one that really stuck out to me is the transformationals who are really, big is cost versus ROI. They don't formally measure ROI yet. So it's like I have this fear of this thing that I don't measure. I'm thinking, okay.
Yeah,
that seems like a kind of random approach to it, but you probably don't have the time of day to go out there and do that kind of thing because you're under pressure to get things moving in this very, very dynamic environment.
that, and ROI measurement is hard with anything, but with AI in particular, especially in terms of like the enterprise impact, that is, and we'll get to kind of what people thought about ROI measurement a little bit later, but yeah, that's a tough nut to crack.
Well, it's certainly not lines of code.
Which doesn't mean people aren't trying to do that. It just, I don't know how well it correlates to your point.
Yeah, I get it.
So before ROI, I also wanted to look at kind of the impact, right? Because really, at the end of the day, using AI, not using AI, that's all well and good. But like, is it having a material, noticeable, if not purely measurable impact on the organization? And apparently it is. So at least something is definitely happening. How much or exactly which direction remains to be seen. But if the people who were asked about biggest impact that AI is having on their enterprise, not surprisingly, software development, velocity, and productivity, by far the largest impact. 73% say that they have seen an impact on that. And then that's closely followed by knowledge management of internal documentation. So 50% think there's been a meaningful change there. And product feature development, 45%. On the other end of the spectrum, very surprisingly, DevOps is the lowest impact of AI on the enterprise with 10%.
That one didn't sit well with me. And it's not because that I think there's anything fundamental about DevOps, but my guess is that those users are most likely the ones that went out, got themselves a $20 a month expensed account with Anthropic or something, and are using it to do batch processing, being able to do configurations for deployments, et cetera. But it's very much utility use, small level, non-strategic, end quote, enterprise type stuff. And it's probably not being recognized as much, but I would be stunned if DevOps people weren't using this heavily just because of how utility it is.
I mean, if you've logged into the AWS console in the last, I don't know how many years, Q is hard to avoid.
Yeah.
That is AI. It's actually quite useful. And I don't know any DevOps person that isn't trying to queue their way through some kind of an AWS thing. So, like, yeah, it is surprising that it's just not coming up to the level of we're really using AI here.
And that brings up a really interesting point is, are people differentiating between intentional use of AI or embedded use of AI? Because to your case, in AWS, you go in there and you start talking to Q, and all of a sudden you're using AI, but maybe it's not being seen as such.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And yeah, you never know kind of what's in people's heads when they say that this had the impact. But I do suspect it's probably much more just visceral. Like when Claude wrote a PR for you, you could notice that. When Q answered a question, maybe not so much.
Right. Yep. Agreed.
The other area we want to cover is concerns, which is, I think the kind of theme here is, if you look at what people are concerned about, the overarching theme is trust is hard to gain but easy to lose. So by far, the largest source of concern is AI output reliability. 43% have real feelings about hallucinations and just how much you can trust what AI is telling you.
Well, and it's not just the hallucinations that you find in the data and the code, et cetera, but just the direct interaction. I mean, you're absolutely right. This is fantastic. This thing is production ready and ready to go. Wait a second. There's a gigantic thing that says air right there. You're absolutely right. That's a critical fatality that should have been fixed long ago. I am so sorry. Why didn't you fix it? Because you're absolutely right. I should fix it. I mean, there's this. It's aimed to please, and the vernacular they use to interact with you,
Yeah,
make it such that it's inauthentic.
exactly. I also think that, like, by now, enough people have asked enough questions of AI, whether it's ChatGPT or anything else, and have gotten like insane answers.
Yes.
Where if you aren't skeptical, I'm surprised it's only 43%, to be honest with you, that thought that this is a real issue. Because how can you not be skeptical of what it's
Well,
telling
anybody
you?
who's typed /compact and doesn't see the difference,
Yeah.
it should
Yeah.
be /lobotomy.
Yeah. It's really interesting. This one area, I mean, obviously, I don't know what will resolve it ultimately. I don't think, and this, I don't know anything about this, but my hunch is this is never going to go away because of just the inherent kind of, you know, randomness of the system.
Yeah, or I'm seeing more people do the kind of stuff that I do, where when you're doing data analysis type things, that you're having one system overlook the other,
Yeah.
just so that you have high speed quality control of some sort in there in the dynamic sense.
And to that point, right? So you can certainly mitigate it, but I don't know if you can ever eliminate it. That's kind of, yeah.
I think by definition, a probability model says it's going to be wrong. It must be wrong a certain amount of the time.
Yep, exactly. As far as other concerns, people are worried about data privacy and security, but 13% of the respondents. Return on investment, we mentioned that earlier, but that is a concern for people. Although smaller percentage-wise than I would imagine. Only 13% were concerned on ROI on these AI tools investments, and then lack of internal expertise. About 10% people, I guess, wish they had more in-house knowledge on how to use it well. And then, a handful of others like job displacement and integration with other systems that they already have, IP risks, and vendor lock-in is like the lowest on this list. And if you just kind of think about back to the days of, I don't know, maybe pre-cloud, I don't know any CTO that was not deathly afraid of vendor lock-in at application stack level, at database level, at server
Oh,
level.
absolutely. I mean, even with the cloud. I mean, once you go AWS, it's hard to go anywhere
But I
else.
think the cloud fundamentally changed in people's minds how bad vendor lock-in is. Because I think prior to that, most of the time you would get burned by, I don't know, Oracle if you get in on that whole thing. But with the cloud, I feel like people are like, vendor lock-in is actually not that bad. And it's interesting that almost nobody cares about this as a concern when it comes to it.
And on a complete sidebar, the cloud has taken Control-Alt-Delete to a much, much larger level. A couple weeks ago, big outage in, what is it, US 1 East.
Yeah.
And people kind of shrugged, oh, Amazon's down. Well, our system isn't working. That's okay. I mean, it's like saying the internet's broken.
It's an act of God.
Yes.
It's force majeure. Like literally, I wouldn't be surprised if, like, in contracts people start defining force majeure as the terrible natural disaster or AWS outage.
Time to Amazon or Google.
Okay, so that's kind of concerns. We talked about this earlier, but we're finally at a point where we can discuss ROI measurement. So I think the headline here is it's hard to do.
Yep.
And 55% of the respondents don't bother. They don't have a way to do it.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. I'm surprised there's actually that many who have attempted to do it. So for those who have been trying to measure it, the most common one is def velocity. And again, right, like that's the most visible. We already talked about that. But then people look at things like employee productivity, 25%, cost reductions, 19%, revenue growth, 17%, quality metrics, 14%, and this one is a little bit of a surprise, customer satisfaction scores, 8%. So, I mean, imagine how much you have to have your house in order to be able to correlate customer satisfaction scores to ROI as a meaningful metric of, like, impact.
There's certainly resources dedicated to that, I believe.
Yeah, you would kind of
it's not a casual thing.
No, nobody just sits down and just off the top of their head tries to do this. But yeah, that was interesting. So people are trying. It's hard. Most aren't really doing it, and ROI measurement is hard. That's just true. That's how it is. And AI, in some ways, probably makes it even more complicated. Finally, how are people getting AI into their organizations? And really, this is kind of two things. What AI is actually being used, and then who's doing it, right? So for what AI, most rely on some commercial API. So whether it's Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, and so forth, but a significant percentage, 35%, rely on open source models, and Llama, DeepSeek, things like this. And I would imagine there's probably some percentage that are overlapping and are using both in different instances and different use cases.
Yeah, yeah, that's not surprising. I think that for those who are committed to using AI for whatever it is their business requirements are, they've probably played around with a variety of them.
Yeah.
And again, there's so many different layers. What's important to determine the one you should be using, that I think there's a space for all of them. I think the open source ones have had a little bit of a backslide a little bit, but you can see that the Facebook guys, the Llama guys, Meta guys, however you want to call them these days, they're digging back in again. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can come back up to the level that we're seeing with the others.
Yeah, and I also think there is something to be said for open source tools. If not, even if they're not as great as the foundational models from the big boys, you can do stuff with them that you probably can't do as easily with the others, in terms of fine tuning and refinement.
Oh, absolutely. I think that one of the key drawbacks to date has been hardware.
Right.
And as that loosens up, or the hardware moves so far ahead that two versions ago is good enough for the stuff you need to do, you're going to start seeing it come back out.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Llamas, the DeepSeeks, et cetera, will start benefiting.
Yeah. I expect the same thing. And then finally, who's doing it? So many use in-house teams, about 58%. Some use consultants, 30%, and then the rest are doing some combination of the two. And that's not surprising, right? So obviously, It takes time and a real meaningful commitment to develop internal expertise in something like this. So you probably need to start somewhere.
Yeah, and I think that those using consultants are probably using them to ramp up, to get things going more quickly, so they can start seeing the benefits, and maybe like to mentor to some extent.
Sure.
But it's not surprising to me that why would you outsource something as critical and as almost nuanced as AI to people outside the organization?
Yeah. Very true. Well, I think that covers all the topics that the survey addressed. If you found these topics interesting and in this episode and relevant to you, remember that LA CTO Forum has lots of opportunities to engage with other CTOs about topics just like the ones we covered. And if you're interested in learning more, find us on LinkedIn or on the web at lactoforum.org. Until next time, may your deployments be smooth and your tech debt manageable.
And remember, if you can't handle the exception, at least log it properly. We'll catch you next time.